Welcome to the first of hopefully many videos documenting our travels flying around New Zealand. I'm a newly qualified private pilot as of just 7 months ago, having trained at Kapiti Aero Club just north of Wellington in New Zealand. It's our summer holidays and we're heading off from the Kapiti coast on a big adventure, a 9-day circumnavigation of the South Island of New Zealand. As we take off from Paraparaumu airstrip, I feel a mixture of both excitement and apprehension. I only have 105 hours flying time, and this trip will be a test of that training. I'm excited to refine my skills and learn as much as I can from the process, all the while keeping the family safe and sound in the Kapiti Aero Club Piper Archer. The Archer is fully fueled and just slightly below the maximum takeoff weight. Our kids weigh in at 49 kilos each, and this is a trip that would be much more difficult once they get older and heavier. The coastal town of Paraparaumu falls away below us, and we strike out across the Cook Strait and over the Marlborough Sounds that sit at the top of the South Island of New Zealand, passing over Nelson and then crossing the Southern Alps en route our first night's destination of Karamea, a very small settlement right at the top of the west coast of the South Island. The last 15 minutes of flight takes us over the untracked Kahurangi National Park, New Zealand's second largest national park and one of the remotest areas in the country. We got clearance to cross over Nelson at 8,000 feet and then climb to 10,000 feet, so we're well above the scattered clouds that top out at 4,000. We then start a descent towards the coast, which is looking absolutely glorious. We're lucky we got going on good time this morning, as within an hour or so of landing, the cloud had significantly built up over the national park, with development of some towering cumulonimbus, which would have prevented our passage to the coast. Karamea is a pretty small place. The area's population is just 900, with a population density of just 0.29 people per square kilometre. It's a remote place, being nearly 100 kilometres up a no-exit road from the nearest larger town of Westport. The area is a gateway to the national park. The early European settlers here arrived off ships in the early 1870s with the promise of land from the provincial government on deferred payment terms. My approach is a bit high and a bit fast. Being used to the Piper Tomahawk, it's easy to forget how long the Archer takes to slow down in comparison. I end up floating a bit down the runway, but I know that I've got 945 metres, so lots of length. The runway has an area of lichen on it, and I get a bit of a surprise when we skid just a smidgen to the left with my initial application of brake, but we quickly regain the centre and we're down safely. The local museum here explains the hardships of the first 20 settlers after arriving by ship. The land they were given was of course heavily forested and turned out to be largely infertile. When the women and children were brought by ship a couple of months after the men, many weren't able to make a go of Karamea and returned to Nelson. Turns out that the Karamea airstrip has a resident goat that likes trampolining. What better way to relax after a narrow skiddy runway than on a west coast beach, while we watch the thunderclouds form over the mountains and feel smug that we snuck through early in the day. Endless kilometres of deserted beach. What a great country we live in.
rush hour in Karamea. Yeah, it's really the only traffic we get around here.
Nice. And how long have you lived in Karamea there, Hokitika?
A few hours.
Ah, you're a recent immigrant.
Yeah, I immigrated in a plane called my Whiskey Night. But this is the news, not the...
Oh, sorry. And what other breaking news is there in Karamea today?
Other breaking news. The rat attacks old man on the street. Cowpat slows down car. And Foursquare closes early.
And tourists,
Join me after the break
tourists,
on Karamea News.
tourists are forced to walk through cow poop on footpath.
But you complain about my cows, eh?
Morning of day 2 brings us some passing showers and a cloud base of 1500 feet. We wait for the showers to clear and then set off down the runway. I'm really looking forward to tracking down the west coast today. Lots of small remote settlements and areas of forest to take in. As we track south, we reflect on how the ability to fly makes the whole country seem so much smaller. Places that we have visited before, after a solid day or two of driving, slip past in just a matter of hours. Joining overhead at Hokitika, we have the place all to ourselves. Hokitika Airport sees just a couple of commercial flights a day, and we've checked the schedule ahead of time to avoid them. Hokitika is the largest town in the Westland District, with a population of 3,250. Apparently, the name Hokitika translates from Maori as to return directly, from hoki meaning to return and tika, direct. Apparently the name comes from when a band of Ngāi Tahu warriors in search of greenstone were about to attack Ngāti Warangipa. The chief of the invaders drowned while trying to cross the Hokitika River, and the leaderless taua or army then returned directly to their own home. Founded on gold mining in 1864, Hokitika was the centre of the West Coast gold rush and grew very quickly. By late 1866, it was one of New Zealand's most populous centres. Flying here today, it's hard to believe that on 16th September 1867, there are apparently 41 vessels documented to be alongside the wharf at Hokitika, in some places 3 or 4 ships deep, bringing in goods to support the gold mining industry and exporting the gold. Lining up the runway, I focus on correcting my floaty landing from yesterday. We have some shorter strips coming up in this trip, and I'd made a plan to measure my landing distance today using runway markings and any landmarks together with Google Earth in order to benchmark myself. It's probably my best landing of the trip, stopping my landing roll within 380 metres of the runway threshold. The promise of a proper coffee at the airport terminal is dashed by the fact that it's all deserted and locked up. Just a quick refuel and a shout out to the guy who gave me a spare quart of oil for Mike Whiskey Mike, as we seem to be burning a bit more than anticipated, and I'm not sure the 3 quarts that I took from the club at the start of the trip will be enough for our entire trip. More on that later, but we're soon on our way again for one of the most exciting sections of flight. Again, I estimate our takeoff distance using Google Earth, and am pleasantly surprised by the performance of the Archer. We're off in about the same distance that we landed, 380 metres or so. As we climb out above the Hokitika town, I make a plan to return to this place as a destination rather than just a fuel stop. There is some awesome tramping terrain in the vicinity. For example, a short drive down the coast gets you to the likes of the Wanganui River, which if you follow it inland for a couple of days will bring you to a small Department of Conservation hut, which is uniquely positioned next to a natural hot spring in the river. So we're off and headed south towards today's destination of Haast, with the hope of the cloud clearing enough to do a few circuits around the really big mountains in the central southern Alps. And boy, do we strike it lucky! Just as we have resigned ourselves to low-level flying all the way to Haast, the cloud starts to break up, and we find ourselves with a clear route into the big peaks of Mount Cook and Mount Tasman. There's still some cloud over the lower glaciers, and I'm careful at all times to maintain an escape route back to the farmland on the coast, so we climb higher to 10,000 feet to give us more than adequate glide distance back to flat ground just in case we need it. In this area, the Alps rise to nearly 4,000 metres above sea level, and the peaks would be less out of place were they in the middle of continental Europe or America, than located, as they are, just a few kilometres from the Tasman Sea. It's very rare to get a completely still, blue sky day in this area. I last flew over this area when I was a teenager on a scenic flight from Tekapo, and my main memory of that was severe turbulence around the mountains and significant air sickness. Today, though, we are treated to absolutely smooth flying, with not a single bump as we traverse ridgelines, snowfields, and glaciers. We look back to the summit rocks of Aoraki Mount Cook, where my climbing buddy and I turned back from a summit attempt many years ago. On that occasion, we had set out from Plateau Hut on the other side of the mountain at 2 a.m. in the morning, and returned to the hut after a solid 20-hour day's climb, but without the summit in the bag. We then waited for another weather window to allow a second attempt for a full 10 days parked up at Plateau Hut before packing it in and returning to Mount Cook Village. We then cruised past Mount Tasman, which is slightly lower than Mount Cook, but a technically more difficult climb. There are no climbers around today. The climbing season in New Zealand is in spring and typically extends from October to early December, when the snow remains firm packed throughout the day and the mountains are best connected to the upper glaciers. Over summer, large bergschrunds open up at the headwalls of the glaciers and prevent easy access. This process has been amplified in recent years due to global warming, and many New Zealand mountains are becoming progressively more difficult to climb as a result. Those of you subscribed to my YouTube channel will be more familiar with posts relating to my garage flight simulator than actual flying. I've done a few flights in this area on the sim, and it's been great training for today's flight. It's remarkable how familiar in a way it feels to be flying around here in real life compared to the sim. Perhaps the biggest difference is the number of other planes in the area today, with about 10 operators all within a few square kilometres of each other. This area has the highest density of visual reporting points of anywhere in New Zealand, and for good reason. There is near continuous radio calls relating to position, altitude and intention. My strategy is to stay at 10,000 feet, which is above where the commercial operators are flying, particularly those ferrying tourists up to the neves of Fox and Franz Josef glaciers. I quickly become well versed in the various reporting points, like Big Mac and Luncheon Rock.
God put a smile upon my face.
The West Coast glaciers of Franz Josef and Fox spill off the main divide. They are unique in the world insofar as they extend right into the temperate rainforest below. That said, the last 40 years have been really significant in terms of retreat of these two glaciers, and it's really sad to see how much they have reduced in volume even compared to visits we made to them in our youth. The glacial ice falls near sea level close to the townships of Franz Josef and Fox are now much less spectacular than what I remember as a child. Next we fly past Mount Early de Beaumont, which I climbed 13 years ago with an American climber. I point out to my family our approach route from the remote Wataroa River on the west coast, over Whymper Saddle and then Tasman Saddle. It's not a difficult mountain to climb other than a small ice fall to negotiate from the neve of the Tasman Glacier. In contrast to the two glaciers on the west coast, Tasman Glacier flows towards Mount Cook Village on the arid east side of the main divide, which sees much less rainfall compared to the west coast.
God gave you style and gave you grace, and put a smile upon your face. Oh yeah.
Having had our fill of the mountains, we continue on down the coast towards Haast. North of Haast is rugged and isolated coastal terrain.
It's as good as mine. It's as good
We finally line up Haast airstrip. This one is not my best landing. I overcorrect a bit from my floaty landing in Karamea yesterday and end up coming in a little bit too slow, which makes for perhaps a more solid arrival than desirable. Haast feels pretty much like the end of the earth in New Zealand terms. To the south, New Zealand's largest national park, Fiordland, stretches all the way to the bottom of the South Island. We check into the World Heritage Hotel, which feels a little bit like stepping back into the 1970s. So thanks for watching to the end of day 2. Please like and subscribe, and watch out for our next video of days 3 and 4 as we continue our adventures on the way south to Stewart Island.